So we are on page 99. And we were speaking about Shabbat. We spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu separating from his wife. Right? I was thinking, by the way, about this idea of separation from his wife. And I'd have to look at the Mefarshim there in the Chumash or speak about the story, but just my own thoughts. On one hand, we very much despise the Christian concept of separation from a spouse as being holy. Meaning they believe that celibacy and all that is very holy. Whereas we don't. Not at all, actually. I mean, there are entire books of Kabbalah, not books, but meditations of Kabbalah, on what to think about when a husband and wife are together and such things. So, we clearly have a very different understanding of sexuality, of relationship, of intimacy, of marriage, of romance than Christians have. But on the other hand, you find that Moshe Rabbeinu, in order to reach his level of holiness, does separate from his wife, and the Jewish people are commanded to follow suit.
Just for a short period of time.
Oh, so this is my nechama. My consolation can be one. It's a short period of time. It's not a forever thing. We don't believe in a forever separation. But why for a short period of time? What about the ideal to grow together and to grow holy together and to be spiritual together? Where is that it's true? I believe that our world doesn't properly stress how distracting the opposite gender is to us. In school, people, it's normal to be in a co-ed school. I went to a co-ed school. Maybe you went to a co-ed school. The difference in the amount of learning that you have in a same gender school to a co-ed school, it's a totally different world. The boys were a little bit wilder in high school because there were no girls around to impress. But there was no distraction. There was nobody in class you wanted to everyone listened to class, you took notes, you did your work, you studied all night, because there was nothing else to do. And when we rob people, especially as they get older, from this ability to socialize within their gender, you find much less serious people. People who are not able to really grow. The feeling that you have in a kollel, or the feeling you have in a Monday morning group, would drastically change if there would be one man or one woman sitting at that table. It's just a different feeling. It's a different experience that you have. And whereas Hashem is not saying separate yourself because they're bad for you, but I need you to not be distracted at all. No. Har Sinai is just about us. It's just about focusing on Hashem, on Torah, on mitzvot, on being a chosen people. And I feel like not so much is it not holy as it is a way to get rid of distractions. And so I'm just pointing out that the fact that he says that they became sanctified by separating from their wives, not necessarily separating from one's wife a cause for holiness. Rather, it's the separation from a distraction that is a cause for holiness. You know, it's a big fight between Ashkenazi rabbis and Sephardic rabbis for thousands of years. Thousands of years, not just hundreds of years. And it's a fight that goes back even to the Talmud, before there were Sephardic rabbis or Ashkenazi rabbis. And the fight is, do you first study Torah and then get married? Or do you get married and then study Torah? At the age of 18, should you say, listen, I've got to go to school, I've got to get a job, I've got to buy a house, I've got an education? Or do you tell yourself, no, I'll get married, and that will give me I'll explain the sides. The sides are, don't get married right away. You're not going to be able to focus on your studies. You're not going to be able to focus on your Torah. So you're going to have to now worry about a wife, who, that's a whole, she doesn't want you to come back home at a certain time. And then you're going to have children, then you're going to have parnasah problems, you have to pay the bills, you're going to have to go to work. You're going to become distracted from what you're trying to do if you get yourself in a relationship too quickly. Other rabbis said, no. You don't understand how strong the Yetzer Hara works on a person who doesn't have a spouse, especially in those years, like 18. Where a person might say, I think I'll learn Torah better when I don't have a wife. But maybe if you would realize that your wife is what will stabilize your life, then you wouldn't get married. It's been a big fight between the rabbis for many, many years. And there's no good answer, to the point where Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo, writes a crazy halakha, which I would almost never say had it not been said by Rabbi Yosef Karo. And the wording I'm trying to remember by heart, but not every word. Can a person choose to never get married and just study Torah? Does someone have that ability? Is that okay to do?
Well, people do it. I mean, you talked about it, but there is a commandment for a man to have children.
Right.
Well, it's not a commandment, but he should.
Bring me a book from the bookshelf, please. And the top shelf. The middle bookcase on the right, the top shelf. Yeah, go 3 bookcases from the wall, from the right. Yeah, that one. Okay, up there. No. On the top bookcase. There's going to be Shulchan Aruch, Even HaEzer. It's going to be first Or HaChaim, is going to be a few volumes. Then your Red Da'al will be a few volumes. And the first one called Even HaEzer. Yeah, one of those. Maybe 4 books from the left, or 5 books from the left.
You have several of them.
Even HaEzer, the one called Even HaEzer.
No.
You're,
Just one.
yes.
See my.
I'll see when you come close. Perfect. Oh, good. It's in 1 volume. Okay, so says Rabbi Rabbi Yosef Karo. Chayav kol adam lisa isha. Every man must marry a woman, kedelifot v'derbot, in order to be fruitful and multiply. V'chol mi she'eino osek b'pirei arvia, and anyone who does not have children, intentionally, meaning they choose to never have children, God forbid, ki'ilu shover damim. It's as if they've murdered. U'mima'et et adamot, and there's a few ways to understand this, but simply they cause less souls to come to the world. V'gorem l'shchina shetistalek miYisrael, and he causes the Shechina to leave the Jewish people. And then Ramah says, V'chol mi she'en lo isha, somebody who chooses not to have a woman, a wife, sharui belo bracha, he's left without any blessing, belo Torah, without any Torah. V'chulei, he quotes the whole Talmud, but he doesn't quote it, he says, look it up there. The Talmud says, you're left without a protective barrier, you're left without any good, you're left without... And then the last part is, V'lo nikra adam, he's not considered a human being, according to the Gemara. A person who does not have a wife. V'kevan shenasa isha, and once a man marries a woman, avonotav mefakpakim, his sins go away. Shneimar matzah isha matzah tov. So he found a woman, he found good. And then the Gemara says that you can sell a Sefer Torah for 2 things.
Someone in the jail.
Right, that's a different halakha, but here he mentions 2 things. To learn Torah, v'lisa ishan, to get married, to marry a woman. And then he says, v'mitzval kol adam shisa isha ben yudchet, and a man has a commandment to get married when he's 18 years old.
Really?
Yes, must. Mitzvah, that's when it happens.
Must.
Yeah, mitzvah. V'hamakdim lisa ben yud gimel, and if he is very particular and gets married when he is 13, mitzvah min hamufchar, it's the highest level of the mitzvah.
It doesn't happen to me.
Aval kodem yud gimel lo yisa, but before 13 he should not get married. Dahavi keznut, because it's considered promiscuous. Uvishum inyan, but in any situation, lo yavor me-20 shana belo isha. A man cannot be older than 20 and not be married. Umi she'avru alav 20 shana ve'ino rotze lisa, and a man who's older than 20 and he says, I don't want to get married yet, bedin kofin oto lisa. Bedin forcibly, they beat him until he's willing to get married. Kedei lekayem mitzvat pnei arvia, in order so that he should have children. Umihu bat im osek b'Torah, if he's studying Torah, v'tarud ba, and he's very involved in the Torah, and he knows that he can't focus on having anything else in his life except for Torah. Umityareh lisa isha kedei shlo yitrach b'mzono, and he's afraid to get married because then he'll have to support his family and it'll take him away from studying Torah. Vidbatel min Torah, and he'll end up leaving the Torah. Mutar lihitacher, he's allowed to push off getting married. But comes the Ramah to save the day. It's crazy. 13, 20, it's crazy. V'zman hazeh, nowadays, nahagu, we have a custom, shelo lachuf hazeh, we don't beat anybody anymore. Meaning, we don't get rid of the mitzvah at 20, we just stop beating people and forcing them to get married. Rama, Rav Moshe Israel.
What's the original one?
Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo.
Okay.
And then this is an interesting halakha. So you're allowed to push off. Let's say you're in yeshiva. You want to study till you're 22, 23, 24. Okay? I remember once Rav Avadia told a story that a 40-year-old man came to him. A kollel man, a man learned, very learned. Torah scholar. Said, Rabbi Avadia, I came to you to get a blessing to get married. I needed help for a shidduch. And Rabbi Avadia said, have you ever been married before? Well, maybe you got divorced. Maybe that's normal. He said, no, I was learning my whole life. So Rabbi Avadia said, I will not give you a blessing. I said, why not? Because you don't deserve it. He said, Maran says you could push off, but not that long. You were negligent in your duties, and now don't come to me for a blessing. Come to Hashem for a blessing.
Pushed off for 20 years.
Very sharp. Very sharp.
Wow. That is very sharp.
So you see that even though pushing off has a limit. But not really.
Yeah, cool. Why are you 25?
Umi, somebody, shechashka nafsho b'Torah, that his soul desires the Torah deeply. Ke Ben Azai, like Ben Azai. Who's Ben Azai? Do you know? There's a few Mishnayot written by Ben Zoma and Ben Azai. And there are disputes about whether or not why they're called the son of, and they don't actually have their own name. So one opinion the Talmud says because they were not rabbis. They didn't receive ordination. They were just brilliant Torah scholars. And that's why they were called Ben Azai, Ben Zoma. Rabbi Avadia Yosef though proves that later on in the Talmud they are called by their first name. And so what he says is that later they did get ordination, just they were already mentioned by the Talmud when they were still youth. That's how brilliant they were. He said then some opinions say that they were never married. And because they're not real humans, because they didn't get married, the Talmud refused to call them by their first name.
I like the first one.
And again, the Talmud points out, but you have Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, you find them teaching halachot about marital relations. How do they know? So one of the rabbis said that he was married and he got divorced. But Ben Azai, according to most opinions, was never married, ever. Just learned Torah his whole life. So says Maran, if there's a person who wants to study Torah and he's the desire for a Torah, like Ben Azai, like almost he's married to the Torah. Tamid, he's always with the Torah, always learning. And he's like glued to the Torah his whole life. He just doesn't get married because he's so busy learning Torah. En biyado avon. There's no sin in his hands. What does it mean, no sin in his hands? What kind of language is that? Does it mean that you could do this?
It doesn't sound like they want to do this. It says after the fact that you've done it, then.
Very good. I'm reading this to mean that it's like after the fact. Okay, it happens to be you learned and you just never got married. Okay. But not that we would tell somebody you should be like Ben Azai and not get married. But there's a condition to being like Ben Azai. And that is vehu, and the condition is shelo yeh yitzaro mitgaber alav. That he will never give in to his yetzer hara because he's not married. To which we say, go find me such a man. How many people can really say, oh look, he's 25, he's never 30, I don't know, he's never spoken to a woman before, suddenly there's a beautiful lady in front of him, sorry, I can't even, I'm busy talking to the Torah right now. So where are you going to find such a man? It means the Shulchan Aruch is almost setting you up for failure. If you are such a person, then could be you really do belong with the Torah. But if the condition is a person can't be doing any kind of averah because he's not married. You'll find that many of our great tzaddikim, Baba Sali for example, got married a few times. Every time one of his wives passed away, he got married. Even at the end of his life, he was a very old man, he got married again. The Kalev Rabbi, not my Kalev Rabbi, the other Kalev Rabbi from Israel, spelled differently. He's a Holocaust survivor, maybe in his 90s. He just got married now to a 60-something-year-old lady.
Anything nice?
Yeah. She was also the widow of another great rabbi, and he lost his wife not so long ago, so figured he doesn't want to ever give in to his Yetzer Hara, so he got married again. Many tzaddikim did this, not just one. Also, there are many tzaddikim who got divorced. Many tzaddikim. The Malbim, heard of the Malbim before? On the Tanakh, the Malbim was divorced, and a bitter divorce. He had to leave town because of her. I'm not sure. I once saw that fact in the Encyclopedia Judaica. Look up Malbim, or his name. Then my wife's Rebbe, the stolen Rebbe, is divorced. He has a wife and a kid, or two kids, I don't know how many, from the first marriage, and it just didn't work out between them. She was another Rebbe's daughter, and she just didn't really want to be observant, and he's the Rebbe, the head of the Chassidut, and his wife was doing all kinds of things, and they had to get divorced. They got remarried. But there's nothing embarrassing about such things. What I'm trying to show you is that all kinds of tzaddikim had all kinds of things, and all kinds of stories, and all kinds of... We're all human beings, and that's what makes them into tzaddikim. That in the face of those very human struggles, they still stayed tzaddikim. Very few people could ever say they were like Ben Azai. That they would never do an averah had they not been married. So, we do it. You should know, it might sound crazy. The Chachamim chose marriage age to be at 18, but if you can, at 13. By the way, this is the reason why Ashkenazim don't wear a talit at the bar mitzvah. You know this. Why don't Ashkenazim wear a talit at the bar mitzvah?
Because they used to get married at age 13.
Right, because bar mitzvah was almost always immediately followed by marriage in Europe. Maybe not in 19th century Europe.
That's pretty, yeah.
14 about was the average age when Ashkenazim got married.
Right.
Yeah, 14. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov got married when he was 14. He had his bar mitzvah, and the next thing he knew, he was married. Rabbi Uziel got married the same year as his bar mitzvah. His father was a Kabbalist and said he knew he was going to die, and asked Rabbi Uziel to get married in his lifetime. And he said that he wouldn't live past his bar mitzvah. So Rabbi Uziel got married at 13 years old. You're talking about a rabbi who passed away in the 50s. Not someone millions of years ago. Yeah, of course.
I knew that people in the old days, a couple hundred years and even further back, people got married younger in those days. Everybody
Sure.
did.
My grandfather, from my father's side, they made Aliyah to Israel in 1948. He was married, didn't have a kid. My father was born in Israel. But he was 17 years old. She was 15 years old. They had already been married for a few years.
What?
They don't know how many years. records in Yemen are not it's not like over here, San Diego County, everything's written, typed up, scanned, photocopied, And probably she was married when she was 14. And he must have been not older than 15, 16.
It was different in the old days.
Right, but they stayed together till the day she died. They were a couple that, you can imagine, he passed away only a few years ago. 3 years ago, maybe my grandpa passed away. 2 years ago, not even. And you see, there are people who... I want to ask Rav Peretz. And Rav Peretz, how was it that these people stayed married? He gave me a very interesting explanation. But he said, today we don't train ourselves. It's not the reason for every divorce, by the way. But when you see like young people, they got married 2 months ago and then they're divorced. They got married a year ago and they're divorced. He said, we don't teach ourselves that marriage is about loyalty and commitment. He said, people think, I'll get married, but I'll still keep looking out. Maybe there's someone better. And then along comes a secretary, and along comes that guy at work, or along comes the person they saw at the restaurant, or along comes their husband's best friend, or their wife, their wife's therapist, or whatever it is that happens, and then the rest does it. He said when a person gets married, searching has to be in the past tense.
Of course.
We say of course, but the world doesn't see it that way. Think about the fact that at a person's wedding, they're dancing with other men or other women. What does that mean? Isn't now the only person you ever want to dance with the person you just got married to 10 minutes ago? Not in the world we live in today. I mean, someone said that the successful marriage in Hollywood means that it lasts longer than a bottle of milk in your refrigerator.
Yeah, a lot of them get divorced very quickly.
No. There are people, they have 20 kids from 10 different people. It's the world that we live in. This is not foreign concept. Thank God in our communities we're a little bit more conservative, a little bit more...
I know women will, I know of at least two or three cases where one lady has 3 kids and they're all from different fathers. That's not uncommon nowadays.
Right? It's not at all
Not
uncommon.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where you have kids in high school here that are pregnant in high school, and they come to school and there are
That was unheard
daycare
of when I was in
programs.
high school.
What?
That was unheard of in high school.
Unheard of.
When I was in high school.
I was just speaking about this at a Shabbat table about 2 years ago. When I first came to America, like 3 years ago, but 2 years ago I met this person. She was a public school teacher in inner city schools in Chicago.
Wow.
And she was a 5th grade teacher and had 5th grade kids who were pregnant in her class.
Wow.
What? They're 11
That's
years
crazy.
old.
I guess there are biologically ways to push the limit, or a kid stayed back in school a year or 2 years, but they're 5th graders. They're sitting in 5th grade class.
Not be a year or two older, but they're
Right.
fit in 5th grade. Yeah.
And you're
I think
asking
it's
yourself...
like the hormones in the food.
Oh,
Well, that's true,
That
but
causes-
so say the Chachamim, why did our rabbis command us to get married so young? And the Chachamim said, listen to the line. The Chachamim say, Mipnei, because sheyitzro, his inclination, evil inclination, bo'er bekirbo, is burning up inside of him.
Yeah.
Chachamim said it's not that we believe people are mature enough to get married at such an age. It could be that 14-year-olds once upon a time were more mature than 14-year-olds today.
no.
I'm willing to say that. But they were still 14 years old in whatever society they were in. They were still people who were 40. You know, they were... But we knew that there was a problem, and you cannot stop this problem. You cannot stop the mingling. You cannot stop the... You're not going to put up a mechitza, a partition, everywhere that you go. Not everything in the world is going to be separate, so you keep the schools separate. Fine. What about Shabbat tables? They're not separate. Separate the Shabbat tables. Fine. Well, playing outside basketball is not going to be separate. Oh, well, they're going to go on the weekends to their friend's house. It's not going to be separate, and they're going to go to school afterwards. They're going to go to work. It's not going to be separate. So what you're doing is you're setting people up for perpetual failure. Say, Chachamim, wouldn't you rather let people get married?
Yeah.
And maybe the status of a marriage is different. It used to be that people got married and they stayed with their parents. Now that might sound crazy, but when you're 14, it's not such a crazy thing to live at home. When you're 35 and you just got married and now you want to move in your parents' one-bedroom apartment, that's crazy. But you're 14, and I'll tell you the truth, as some of my grandparents I've heard in their stories, that they didn't necessarily live together once they got married. They were husband and wife in whatever sense that meant, but they weren't necessarily together. She was at home with her mother. He stayed there for a week. They went to his family. They were there for a month. The definition of marriage was different, but what it meant was, if somebody had a yetzer hara, and it's not an evil thing, it's a natural thing, they had a partner in crime, so to speak. Chachamim had a system. It wasn't that human nature has changed. Human nature was exactly the same as it was.
Yes,
But they had a solution for it. I'm on tape, so I'm not going to say who, but I know a rabbi who 50 years ago, maybe 45 years ago, did 2 chuppahs for 14-year-old kids getting married, which was illegal at the time in the country that he lived. But he wouldn't do it. He researched the couple, saw who they were, what they were, and he figured that they were mature enough to get married. They were. He felt so. Listen to this. It's almost 50 years later. He knows their family, and their grandkids, and their great-grandkids, and they're still married. They're still married. He said it was a coincidence. He would never do it again. He said 50 years ago, the world looked like a different place.
it was.
But I very much believe that children turn out the way we teach them to be. Today you could be 40 and living in your mother's house and playing video games all day long, even though you have a PhD from Harvard, you could still. There are such people in the world. They're little children that are still. They're adults. Their body got older, but they themselves didn't ever mature. And I'm not talking here for reasons that are medical, but the societal. Society tells you that you could be 50 and still be a child. You could still, I don't know, go to. Let's have a guy come stay here. Forgive me if he is ever listening to my classes one day, but a married man with children, religious guy, comes every year to San Diego. There's some comic convention that goes on over here.
Well, the Comic Con thing downtown.
He loves cartoons and he
convention
loves the
center.
things, and I'm not putting down anybody's hobby in the whole world. But there's a certain point where you're married and you have children, and there are many reasons for why you should leave home for a week or two. But one of them is not to go see cartoons. It might be to make money to bring home. Yeah, that's a reason, or to go look for schools for your children, or to send your wife to their family in Israel, or whatever it's going to be. But to go see cartoons in San Diego, something about our world is it's off.
They dress up as Batman and Superman.
Yes,
and
I heard
all
that
these
downtown
elaborate
looks like
costumes.
a TV show going on.
Huge deal.
Okay, so forgive me if I'm not even to offend anybody. It's not bad. It's just it's innately childish, and when 40-year-olds can be that way and 60-year-olds can be that way, so what do you expect from a 10-year-old? Why should a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old do their homework? Why? You haven't given them any responsibility. Judaism believes that 13 years old you became a man, and what happens when you're a man? You're responsible. What does responsible mean? Everything. You're responsible for everything. The Talmud says that every penny that you give your child after he's 13, it's tzedakah. Because technically he should go get his own job and work. Yeah, the Talmud says, Barry, use that on your kids. Say, you pay your own tuition. Yeah, but the truth is, the Talmud says, but somebody who throws his child out of the house when they're 13 is an achzari, is a cruel person. Who are you to throw your child out of the house? It's not the way to word it. Obviously, there's a balance, and everything in Chazal is balanced. So if you're a person who knows it, you gotta wait till you're 20 or even 25 or 30 or whatever years it is. But there's a limit to waiting, and there's a limit to how, and there's also a limit to how much you're going to expect youth to stay separate and never do anything wrong. They're not going to. They're not angels. The Torah was not given to angels. Isn't that what Talmud says? The Torah was not given to angels. It was given to human beings. So how do we expect kids to be angels? It's a mistake. It's a mistake. We can't fix the whole world at once. But Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, marriage can sometimes be a distraction. Not a long-term thing that you get away from, but it's sometimes, to be spiritual, you have to step away. And there are 2 times, by the way, during the year, on holidays, that we do step away from each other as partners. Once on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, but for 2 very different reasons.
And what's the other one?
Yom Kippur and the 9th of Av, which is coming up. 9th of Av we separate because of...
The destruction of the temples.
It's in mourning. We really, it's an affliction almost of ourselves. And even though the Torah uses the word inui to suffer a little bit in Yom Kippur, but not an inui which is mourning. Yom Kippur is a very happy day technically. It's listen, I have to do tshuva. And so that once you have to give me space to just connect to myself. So it could be this is the Jewish people's Yom Kippur that we're going through now. It wasn't that Hashem says divorce your wives, get rid of your wives, but each of you have to connect to me on its own level. And this is what I've been thinking since last week when we learned Kuzari. It cannot be that there's holiness in separating from a spouse. But it must be that this act of getting away from a distraction. I'll tell you the truth, is when someone's in a class and there's a spouse waiting at home, there are kids and they need to be put to bed. Their wife isn't evil for saying, hey, it's 10:15, why aren't you home yet? It's not an evil person. It's a normal person. Thank God they let them go from 8:30 till 10 o'clock. But that's a distraction. And on nights where they're not home or the kids are sleeping, so suddenly, I can learn till 11 if I wanted to. And so should you learn every night till 11? Not necessarily. But there's freedom in that ability to grow on one's own also. To tell you the truth, it's not a political conversation today. Traditionally, it seems to be that in Judaism, a man worked and a woman took care of the home, and he worked also to take care of her. And I believe that there are very few jobs today where only a man can work and support an entire family, especially if you want to send them to Jewish school, if you want to... It's almost impossible, almost. And Baruch Hashem, the world has evolved to the point where it's already considered normal for a woman to go and get a job and to have a career and to become educated. It's a very special thing, by the way, that it's no longer a rebellious thing. There were years where ladies did that, but it was, I'm rebelling against the world, I'm rebelling against the system, I'm a feminist, Today, it's a normal thing that two people, even in very traditional conservative environments, that two people work and they're the breadwinners together and it's a partnership. And I happen to believe that that form of a relationship, in many situations, not always, is very healthy. Two people are both appreciative of what it takes to bring money home, to put things in the... You don't have one side smooching off the other side or feeling that the other one's doing me a favor. And now in an ideal marriage, no spouse will ever make the other one feel like I'm doing you a favor. But unfortunately, not every person in the world is in an ideal marriage. But many times I tell people that just because she got married to someone very successful doesn't mean she shouldn't finish college. Doesn't mean that she shouldn't have a career or work at least part-time on the side or in the summers or something. And I'll tell you what, I've seen too many times couples that after many, many years of being together, they got divorced. And I told you that's a normal thing that happens. But then she's left without any way in the world. It's been 50 years or 30 years or 20 years since she ever held a job. And then you come back to the work world, and it's not a very merciful work world out there. 20 years out of the market. So what experience do you have? Do you know how to use a computer? Do you... Such questions. And I'll tell you, raising 10 children is a feat that none of those bosses could ever do.
No.
But it doesn't count on a resume in the world today. And there's a certain level of cruelty, by the way, to do that to a woman after, or a man, whichever situation it is, after so many years. Rabbi Huda Nasi, you know Rabbi Huda Nasi? I believe it was him. It could be Rabbi Yochanan, one of the rabbis of the Yud in the Talmud. And he got divorced to a lady who made his life miserable. And for the rest of his life, he would run to her door before Shabbat and hide money there. And once a man saw him, he said, "What are you doing? So many years you've been divorced, you're married to somebody else." So it says in the Torah, "Umibsarcha al titanan." From your flesh you should not hide your eyes. And the Torah is teaching you that if your children or your siblings or your spouses or your parents are suffering, you have an obligation to help them before you help somebody else. Umibsarcha, your flesh, you should never turn away from your flesh. And he said, she used to once be a part of my flesh. And even though we've been removed, I still have an obligation to take care of her. That's not in the Ketubah. There's no child support, alimony, there's no... That Rizal says, Mas are Gilgulim, reincarnations that come to study Torah.
I thought it was...
So hopefully he comes to study Torah. And not eat my clothes. You find that there was a certain... Of course, life was miserable together. But there should be some form of once upon a time we appreciated each other.
A lot of integrity.
And it's a lot of integrity. And today nobody wants to have integrity. Everybody wants to sue everyone else for the last dollar, for the last dime, and the rest of their lives they fight, and then they wonder why their children, and all kinds of things that happen from it. Now it's not so simple. You could be a person of integrity and the other person has no integrity whatsoever. And that's a situation that nobody chose. And then you're stuck. You can't be a person with integrity even if you wanted to. But the idea is that a person has to know to also stand on their own 2 feet. And I recommend this to a lot of people that I see that get married. That of course you can trust somebody, but always make sure that you also have your hand in the world, or you know what things are. Not everyone... There was a philosopher who once said, it's a nice thing to see strangers become friends, but it's a tragic thing to see friends become strangers. And it's something the world doesn't teach us. The world doesn't teach us how to separate and still be civil. And not just in marriage. Business partners. Even now, communities, you see, if somebody really knew Torah, they would know that we can be separate, we can go 2 different ways, and there doesn't have to be a fight about it. It doesn't have to be dirty. It doesn't have to resort to mudslinging. I'm experiencing this, I'm telling you, for the last 2 months, every single day. And I'm looking at the Torah and saying, I wish people could look at the same Torah I'm looking at. The one that says we don't agree on anything. we can even believe that the other one is rotten to the core. We could believe something. That's why we're not together anymore. But there's an integrity of we once upon a time were friends. And friends, even if we know secrets about each other, whatever it is, you don't ever betray somebody else, even if they're no longer your friend. It's a... Raul once told me a story of a drug dealer, right, whose girlfriend called up, and she got angry at her drug dealer boyfriend, so
he was concerned with another woman.
Right, he was being unfaithful, so she called up the border patrol, I guess.
No, it was the North County Narcotics Task Force. I was assigned to it at the time.
Raul was in the narcotics task force, so she called up the narcotics task force and told them everything about her boyfriend. Just to get back.
Address, phone number, age, DOB, license plate number, where he hit he was dealing in heroin. Where he kept it with the sheets to keep it cold and hard because it has to be hard. And so the next day we went with a paid snitch, a paid informant, a female who was a former heroin addict, and she had tracks on her arm. So she obviously had tracks. Normally they don't sell to a stranger unless they can see tracks. If you go up there and your arms are clean like
they know you're.
They're not going to sell you heroin. No, get out of here. I don't know what you're talking about.
Must be a cop.
If they see tracks, they'll sell to them, even though they don't know them. So she went and bought 3 different times from him. The third time we busted him. We got arrested.
See, this is
on the phone call. One phone call.
This is See, I'm happy to see on one level that a drug dealer was taken care of.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with a drug like heroin. Yeah, but on the other hand, that betrayal, it's something that a person should never... I'm not here talking about morality of reporting a drug dealer. Just in general. Everyone knows secrets about other people that we're friends. And the best kind of friend you could have is to know that even when we are no longer friends, my secrets are still safe.
But we don't really know how to be friends either.
Sure. I have 2 books on my shelf. It's poems and sayings of Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gviro. Have you heard of Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gviro? Yeah, there's a street name there for his Rabbi. Why? Who was he? You know who he is. You just don't know that you know who he is. One of the famous Sephardic poets and singers of the 12th century, 13th century. Many of the Shabbat songs you sing were written by Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gviro. And many of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur liturgy, especially in Ashkenazi Sidurim, are from Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gviro. A very special soul. Persecuted his whole life also because of his poetry and because of his music and because of he was too secular in his style. And today we pray with his songs. It's an incredible thing, right? Rav Shlomo Ibn Gviro has a beautiful section on friendship. What is a friend? Who would you choose to be your friend? And one of the sayings he says is, the friend I would choose is one who, even if he hated me, would never harm me. Something like that, something along those lines. It's a very wise thing. Well, do you really know when you have a friend if they're the kind of friend that will never hurt you? You don't know. So how do you find... People of integrity. That was a good word to throw out there. People of integrity. People of integrity they stay that way. They stay loyal even when they don't need to be anymore. Because loyalty has nothing to do with my friendship with you. It has everything to do with my connection to Hashem. Or my need to be a moral human being.
Right.
And that's the line that's confused. Today, people don't have any morality. They don't have any objective morality.
That's right.
I once told somebody that I'd be much more willing to visit a Muslim country than I would the People's Republic of China. I said, it's not a race, God forbid. Chinese people, beautiful people, human beings of Hashem. But I'm afraid of the Chinese government, more than I'm afraid of Muslim governments. I'm terrified of Muslim governments, as you know. There's a reason my family left. Because a person like me will get their head cut off before they know it.
Oh, yeah.
But, see, there, in the most twisted and perverse sense, they have a God. Some kind of God. Some kind of God where you find still, and I'll tell you, not our whole life has to be governed by politics. There are Muslims in the world who are honest people, and they have respect for people, and they give charity, and they have a God. I think their God is crazy. But it's a God. In certain countries, the only God they have is money.
Yeah.
Who is going to pay me more? You know, I was just today, someone put a video from Saudi Arabia of a man beating his slave.
Oh.
Saudi Arabia. America has no problem being an ally of Saudi Arabia.
No.
Israel, God forbid Israel builds a house in the wrong neighborhood and it's condemned.
Yeah.
Cuba. I don't know anything about Cuba. I'm not a politician. I'm sure there are good reasons to not have ties with Cuba.
Right.
My understanding, though, is that a lot of that was political, to outdo communism and to fight communism. But you really hate the communists more than you hate the people with slaves in Saudi Arabia?
They're equally,
Really?
equally bad.
They're equally bad, so just don't have a double standard. What about Mexico? I will forever never understand the hardship that we put on people who want to immigrate to here from Mexico. It's a country that is not at war with us, they're not fighting with us. We as Jews benefited very much from the Mexican government after the Holocaust. And as an American country, we'd say, listen, we have Canada on one side, they're nice people, they don't do any harm to us. We have Mexico on the other side, sure we have big drug problems, but you have any country where the law isn't so strong, you're going to have people making money in illegal ways. But these are not enemies. There are people in this country who are enemies of this country, and they're not treated that way because we're allies with their country. And that's a crazy thing, because money is my God. Morality isn't my God. Hashem is not my God.
Howard.
Sure. You know who it reminds me of? Those guys. In yeshiva, you had people very into sports. I never understood, like, sports is like, it's a non-Jewish thing, so how could you be in yeshiva and be so into sports? But I guess it's better than being into something else, or things that are inappropriate, or whatever else it is. And they would bet on these teams, and not really bet, but like, I'm voting for this guy, and if you, I'll buy you lunch, or whatever it was that they did. Not under rabbinic supervision. And there were always those guys that they would answer vaguely enough, because they were always on the winning team. Whatever team won, that was the team they had voted for. Those people didn't have any standards. They didn't have any loyalties. They didn't have any morals. And I'm sure that if you look in other areas of their life, they were the same way. They were about, I want to be on the winning team.
On the winning side, wherever that is.
I don't want to be on the right side. I want to be on the winning side. In the world, we're surrounded by a world of consumerism, of capitalism, of let's be winning, let's be rich, let's be famous, let's be... share with the Dvar Torah will end. The Kuzari, this is what I'm trying to share with you. A point that I've been working on for a week has nothing to do with the rest of the Kuzari that we're reading. But I think this Shira has its own value. There's a song that we sing for a boy at his Brit in Sephardic communities. You might have heard it at Chanan's Brit. Besiman tov ben balanu beyamav yavo hagoel amen. It's a piyut that we sing. We say in great Mazal Tov, a new son came to us, and in his lifetime, we bless him that he should merit to see the Mashiach. And then, one of the stanzas of the song, Sephardic songs always one person sings and everyone else repeats. One person sings, everyone else repeats. There's one part, the one who's getting his brit today, he should be blessed for his parents. And then there's a line that says that he should be very learned in Torah and become very famous. And Rav Peretz wants out, what do you mean he wants to be famous? That's not the point. We don't want people to become famous. We don't have in Judaism a desire to study to become famous. So why are we blessing a child? Like we're like dooming him before he starts. We're giving him a blessing, you should be famous. With fame comes many challenges. And that's not a Jewish goal. To be learned, yes. To be holy, yes. To be spiritual, yes. To be famous is not a value. And I'll bet something beautiful. It says someone who really knows Torah, our dream is that he should be famous. Because that way, if he's famous, the world that enjoys fame and celebrates fame will take his values. And that's the blessing. The blessing we're giving him is you should be famous enough that Torah shouldn't be for old people in the corner of some dark attic somewhere. But Torah should be famous people study Torah. Famous people want to get close to Hashem. Famous people want to be moral. That's the blessing that we're giving. And I believe that we're in a world that is becoming more and more of a reality. Today I got a haircut. And it's been many years since someone asked me this question. But someone said, do you know Matisyahu? Remember Matisyahu was like a religious guy. Okay, today he doesn't have a beard. I'm not into the politics of Matisyahu, not Matisyahu. But could you imagine that in the world of music, there would be a Jewish guy with the name Matisyahu who's famous?
That's true.
Could you imagine such a thing? Avraham Fried couldn't do it. Mordechai Ben David couldn't do it. Shweki couldn't do it. These are our famous singers. But they never managed to break the bubble of fame, of reaching a place where, I'll never forget, Target, Baltimore, Reisterstown Road, 2008. I was in Target, and they sell TVs. intern. They have like a TV section or a front section. And I heard these guys jumping up and down. They were not Jewish guys. They were black, Baltimore guys. We want Mashiach now. We want Mashiach now. And I'm saying, jumping. You want what now? You want Mashiach now? You want who? That was the first time I met Matisyahu. At that time, Matisyahu was a Chabadnik. So all of his songs were about bringing Mashiach now. And he had people in Target in Baltimore singing, we want Mashiach now. See, but that's the way you're going to change the world. It's not the only way we're going to change the world. But imagine if people were singing, Chazak, Chazak, Venit Chazak. Imagine if they were singing that. Imagine if they were singing Yaakov Shweki, V'hisha Amda. Imagine if people were singing If I Forget Yerushalayim. Imagine if people were singing such songs. The world would look different.
Oh boy, yes.
The world would look different. And that's the message of today. There are ways to get away from distractions. For some people, it's being married is saving me from my Yetzer Hara. For some people, not being married, like Ben Azai, saves me from the distraction of having to be married. The ideal situation are when both spouses are looking out for each other's spiritual well-being and they push them forward. Like Moshe Rabbeinu and his wife. His wife was no lady who was a distraction. She wasn't high maintenance. Moshe, you better get home by 9 o'clock. Tell Hashem that you'll see him tomorrow, right? She wasn't that kind of wife. But push comes to shove. There's a time where even the distractions that are good for you, you have to put on the side. And do things that are better than that distraction. And maybe we're sharing one last thought. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, in his writings, in the Hayom Yom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, a book which I studied almost every day for 5 years. I studied that book. It's a book that most people don't study in depth because it's very short and very easy to read, but there's a lot of depth to that book. Someone wants to read it properly. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, there's a frum Yetzer Hara. There's an evil inclination who's religious. What does he tell you? Oh, you want to go visit somebody who's sick? Nah, you got to pray now. Oh, do you want to go help that lady cross the street? No. You promised somebody you'd be learning Torah with him right now. This Yetzer Hara gets you away from doing mitzvot and by pretending to be religious. He said, what most people don't know is there's a Hasidic Yetzer Hara. Lubavitcher Rebbe writes, I didn't make it up. It says the Yetzer Hara that tells you, what? Don't pray now. Study Hasidus instead. You know what? Don't do this. Say Tehillim instead. He said the Yetzer Hara comes to you with a piety that only Hasidim have and gets you to do things wrong with it. And what I learned then from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of course learning Hasidut is a holy thing. Of course saying Tehillim is a holy thing. Of course praying and learning Torah is a holy thing. But sometimes those things are also distractions. And just because sometimes we get away from it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Just like during Torah reading, you're not supposed to be reading a Jewish book. But you like to read Jewish books. I know, but now is the time to listen to the Torah. You can read Jewish books instead of when you would be watching TV. That's a better time to read Jewish books. Right? You should, but I want to read the Torah now. Now's not the time to read Torah. Now's the time to pray Shemona Esrei with everybody else. Make sure you read the Torah instead of going out to dinner tonight at some fancy sushi restaurant. We have to make sure that we're not distracted even by good things, let alone by bad things. But that was a level of holiness the Jewish people were reaching here. The Jewish people were already Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, we had a Moshe Rabbeinu. But even Moshe had to separate from good distractions. Because the Torah tells you that even those things you have to know how to be disciplined about. Even those things you have to have self-control over. The things that are good. But sometimes too much good is a bad thing. And therefore there are times where you get away even from the things that are good. Eating on Shabbat is a good thing. So why Yom Kippur? It's a Shabbat, Shabbaton, it's a double Shabbat, we don't eat? Because it's a special kind of Shabbat. It's the kind of Shabbat where you try to keep Shabbat without getting distracted by the eating part of it. It's something that takes a lot to understand. But B'ezrat Hashem, that should be our understanding for this week.